Hey guys, welcome to Comics on Screen. I'm your host Chris, and today I'm going to do a very belated review on the newest Marvel Cinematic Universe entry, Captain America: Civil War. This was a movie that was highly anticipated. A lot of people had thought that this movie was going to happen even before it was even announced. I remember it being announced in 2014, and I know a lot of people who have said that when they went to go see Age of Ultron, they were a little bit distracted because everyone was excited for Age of Ultron, but they were also more excited for Civil War at that point. And this movie was also going to include the introductions of Black Panther, and they were going to bring Spider Man from Sony over to the MCU, and that this movie was going to make a lot of changes to the universe. And it was crazy, and also because of the Batman v Superman backlash from fans, a lot of people were looking at this movie on the way to like, okay, then DC did it wrong and Marvel's gonna do it right. So I guess disclaimer, I actually ended up I do like Batman v Superman. There's a lot of things I liked about it. There's a lot of things I really hated about it. I don't think it deserved the critical backlash that it got. But I didn't like it. I liked Civil War more. But I also found myself not loving Civil War as much as I thought I was going to, or as much as a lot of other people that I talk to do. I mean, especially like reading some of the reviews after I'd seen the movie, where I think someone had written like it was like the greatest superhero movie of this century, and I just feel like we saw two completely different movies. Civil War, more importantly, the title of Captain America: Civil War, it struggles to be two different things. It's trying to be a sequel to Avengers: Age of Ultron, and you can totally see that with the amount of Avenger characters that are in here and the fact that it deals with what happened in Sokovia, and it also is trying to be a sequel to 2014's Captain America: The Winter Soldier, with Steve and Bucky and Falcon being involved in that storyline. And what they're attempting to do is take those two storylines and mesh them together. And we just had the second season of Daredevil, which was attempting to do the same thing, was attempting to take a story with the Punisher and the story with Elektra, and at the end of the season, put those two things together seamlessly. And in my opinion, the show failed at doing that. The story with Punisher was way more interesting. The story with Elektra, in my opinion, was completely all over the place, and they couldn't really find a way to mix them together. Civil War does a much better job at this, even with it only being 2.5 hours compared to the amount of time Daredevil had. But my biggest issue with the movie is the lack of an emotional character arc for Captain America. Steve, and what I mean by arc is that every movie has the protagonist of the film go on a journey, on a story in which they fundamentally change from the person they were. The person they were in Act 1 is not the same as they are in Act 3. And I don't just mean in like the last 5 or 6 minutes of the movie. That change has to happen in the third act of the film. So really, when they make a major decision, or just we call it the Act 3 decision, and they go into the climax of the movie, they are a different person. With Steve Rogers, I never got the sense that the person that he was in Act 1 was different from the person that he was in Act 3. And I feel like in the first Avenger and in The Winter Soldier, we do see a change in Steve, and in fact, you see it in every Marvel movie, and in fact, you're supposed to see it in basically every movie. Every movie follows this formula, and Steve doesn't really have an arc like that. He doesn't really have an Act Three decision. He doesn't. He's the same guy. I mean, he disagrees with the Accords, and he is trying to help Bucky, and he's willing to break the law to do that. And in the third act of the film, it's the same thing. He doesn't make any fundamental change. I don't think he really learns anything. And him, and okay, I'm sorry. There's going to be spoilers in this review. So if you don't want to see, if you haven't seen the movie yet, I mean, I'm late on the review. I'm almost a week late, so I hope if you are planning to see it, go see it. But I am going to spoil the movie here. When he gives up his shield at the end, with the battle with Tony, and the movie ends without him in a Captain America costume, and there's this idea that Steve is now no longer Captain America because of what he's done. That comes so late in the movie that it really does. I don't want to say it doesn't matter, because obviously there's going to be ramifications of that in the next few movies in Phase 3. But if that had came earlier in the film, that could have been something really interesting to see, that he actually has to give up being Captain America because of what he's about to do, that he's not worthy to wield the shield, and all of that. That would have been interesting, but it comes so late that you can't even say that is the character arc of the guy. The thing about this movie is that a lot of people had joked that it shouldn't be called Captain America Civil War, it should be called Avengers Civil War, and I don't think it should be called Avengers Civil War, because characters like Hawkeye and Black Widow, for example, get way they don't have enough screen time. If this was an Avengers movie, and especially with the fact that Thor and Hulk are, nowhere to be seen in this film, but I think it should have been either called just Civil War, or more appropriately titled Iron Man Civil War. Because Tony Stark in this movie, first of all, I think he's in this movie way more than I believe some people thought he was going to be in it. He's all over this movie. I mean, don't get me wrong, Cap still has the most screen time of any character, but Tony is a close second. And in a lot of ways, this feels like the best Iron Man sequel that was ever made. He has the character arc. The character of Tony is not the same character in Act 1 as he is in Act 3. And he actually does make an Act 3 decision. He realizes that he is wrong about a thing that Cap is saying. And he goes and he puts his ego aside and decides to help Cap as a friend. Now, very quickly, that goes south because of Zemo's plan, but it's still there. So I do feel as a character arc. Another issue with the movie is like you can see what feels like the remnants of what Captain America 3 was going to be before they decided to do a Civil War. I mean, you can see that with Crossbones, and you can kind of see it with Zemo a little bit, even though Zemo's plan was eventually to work in Tony into that. And for me, I have to say, as much as I enjoyed Winter Soldier, I found myself less interested in the sort of Winter Soldier sequel story that was going on, and way more interested in the Civil War angle. And I think in a perfect world, we could have gotten that Captain America 3, and then we could have just went into Civil War. But I think by combining the two, you kind of lost a little bit of each story. I want to talk about the character of Zemo, because in some way, it seems the audience is really divided on this guy. Some people think he's another really weak villain for Marvel. and then some feel like he's the greatest villain Marvel ever had. For the record, I think the best villain Marvel ever had wasn't Loki, but was actually Alexander Pierce, Robert Redford's character from The Winter Soldier. I think he is the best villain they ever had. Mainly because I never very rarely does he actually perform like he's a villain. He is a character that thinks he is completely right in everything he's doing, and I love that about Pierce. And I just think he does way more. I mean, what he was able to accomplish in Hyde and Hydra for, so many years is just amazing. With Zemo, one of the problems with this movie is that it's never really addressed what the public knows. So maybe I have to go back and watch Age of Ultron. Maybe they revealed this at the end, but does the public know that Ultron was created by Tony Stark? Does the public know that the Avengers were basically there to clean up Tony's mess? Does the public think that Ultron was created by the Avengers? What do they know? Because if they don't know that Tony created Ultron and they don't know that the Avengers were in some way responsible for Ultron, I just feel like Zemo's argument is a little weak here. His family lived outside of the Battle of Sokovia. He thought he was going to be okay, despite the fact that we had several scenes of the Avengers evacuating Sokovia. And I guess, I mean, I understand from his point of view, but outside of his point of view, I'm finding it a little hard to be entirely sympathetic to Zemo. Because it's not like the Avengers went into Sokovia and had absolutely no regard for human life. We had scene after scene of them doing that. And the reason that we had scene after scene of them doing that is that was, in my opinion, 100% a reaction to the criticism of Zack Snyder's Man of Steel, in which it looked like thousands and thousands of people died, and Superman didn't really have regard for human life. I mean, in Age of Ultron, you see that in the battle with Hulk, and in Age of Ultron, you see that in them evacuating Sokovia. And I could understand if Zemo knew that Tony Stark was responsible, that he knew that the Avengers were responsible, and it wasn't just Ultron. Because if he doesn't know that, and in the movie he makes no mention that he knows any of that, it feels like the person he really should be blaming is Ultron, and instead, because the Avengers defeated Ultron, and because he defeated Ultron and prevented Sokovia from becoming a meteorite and destroying, like half the world, Zemo is now averting his attention and grief and vengeance to the Avengers. And I just feel like that part of the story they really weren't explaining a whole lot. My other problem with Zemo, and this is a problem I had with Lex Luthor. I mean, just for the record, I did like Zemo more than Lex Luthor because I think, I honestly didn't mind Jesse Eisenberg as Lex Luthor, and I don't want to turn this into a BVS review, but I did find Zemo's motivation, clearer than Luthor's, even though there is that whole issue of, what does Zemo know about Ultron and Sokovia? And I think with both Zemo and Luthor, they have motivation issues just because we don't really get into it as much. But Zemo's plan in the third act of the movie just made absolutely no sense to me. And I've been talking to a lot of friends and a lot of people who have been trying to defend what Zemo does in the third act. And it really doesn't make a lot of sense. So let's just go through this. Zemo's entire plan is he has decoded the information that Black Widow released of S.H.I.E.L.D. / Hydra. he believes that he knows the Winter Soldier killed Tony's parents. And he is going to drive a wedge between the two of them. Okay, problem number one. There's no way for Zemo to know that Captain America knew. But I'm willing to believe that Zemo thinks that Cap would protect Bucky from Tony, and that would be what they would fight with each other. Even though to me it seems more like Tony was so upset that Cap actually knew. And how he knew is that Zemo shows him the article of the things that Hydra has done in Winter Soldier. And so Cap is actually telling the truth in that moment, that he didn't know that when Zemo showed him that the person who did it was the Winter Soldier, and he didn't know that Bucky was the Winter Soldier at that moment. But he could probably put two and two together once he knows who the Winter Soldier is and what he's done. I'm willing to go with that. So we're okay at this point. He goes to the general guy, finds the book. The guy won't tell him any information about December 16th, 1991. Okay, got it. Somehow Zemo gets a mask that makes him look exactly like Bucky. How he got this mask, no idea. Maybe he borrowed it from Tom Cruise in Mission Impossible. But he blows up the conference at Vienna, blames it on Bucky. He killed a king, so it's going to get attention, draws him out. CIA gets Bucky. He somehow gets a hold of the doctor for the CIA, kills him, takes his identity, which again, this just seems it's way too easy to get into the CIA, creates an EMP, takes out all electronics, which is really interesting because really minutes after the EMP goes off, Tony Stark is somehow able to use his watch with the Iron Man arm. But okay, let's just go with this. Says the goes to Bucky, gets the information. I'm assuming he told Bucky to go to Siberia, and that's where Bucky was going, and until Cap stopped him. And Zemo is on his way to Siberia. Once Bucky tells him this, Captain America everyone thinks that he's going to Siberia to unleash the other Winter Soldiers. And this is where we get into Act 3. He wasn't going to get the other Winter Soldiers. He kills the other Winter Soldiers. His entire plan was to lead them to the base where he would have the video. Number one, why would Hydra still have this video? If you're not supposed to have any witnesses, and the only evidence that Bucky did this and he killed the Starks and he took the super soldier serum was this video, why would they still keep it? It doesn't make any sense to me. But anyway, bearing that, he also called the hotel to get the woman to come in, find a dead body. It gets back to Tony. Tony then goes to see Falcon. Falcon tells him where Steve's going to be. It definitely comes off like this whole thing was Zemo trying to get Iron Man, Captain America, and Bucky all in the same place at the same time. And this is one of the most convenient things ever, because it's really important to demonstrate that Zemo isn't any, after he leaves, when he gets the information from Bucky, he's on a plane and he doesn't know anything that's going on between the time he leaves the CIA facility and the time he gets to Siberia. So there's a whole civil war that happens. Tony could have arrested Steve and Bucky, and they could have been in prison and not on their way to Siberia. Then Tony would have the issue of trying to get, because the other thing is, the reason Tony and Bucky would be arrested is not because of their proposed innocence, Captain America still, went outside the law. So he would still be arrested even if Tony got the information. How did Zemo know that Tony was going to go to Falcon and Falcon was going to be able to give him the information to where Steve was going? All of these things that, like, it's such a coincidence that they end up in Siberia in that place at the same time so that he can show Tony the video. I've heard so many people try to defend this and say that that's not part of Zemo's plan, but it makes zero sense why he then calls the hotel to let everyone know his plan. It's obvious that he's trying to do it so he can get Tony to be in Siberia, but it doesn't make, like, there are so many things that could have went wrong, and he leaves everything to chance. But the movie kind of makes it out like he knew this was going to be the final result, and it's just, it's so ridiculous to me. I mean, it's like when you're talking about in BVS when Lex Luthor makes Doomsday. It's like, okay, well, what was he going to do if Batman killed Superman? Even if Batman didn't kill Superman, Superman was still alive. What if Superman died before he could kill Doomsday? Like, what was going to happen? Was he just going to let Doomsday roam Earth and basically destroy it? Like, both of these villains have these plans in the third act that it's just so not well thought out. And because so much of Zemo's story is dependent on this whole plan, it really fell apart for me in the third act. I also thought the first act was really slow, and it just felt. I know they were trying to get everyone's motivations in check, but I just really was just like, wow, this is not going. The pacing's not very good for the first act. I thought the pacing for the second and the third act were much better. And I know I'm getting with all the negatives, and I will definitely get to the pros in a second, but the last negative I have is really weird, creepy, and awkward forced relationships in this movie, particularly Steve and Sharon, which came out of nowhere. I know they like semi-flirt it, but honestly, it was really disturbing that they were having like a moment after Peggy's funeral. I thought that was incredibly inappropriate, especially because the movies and the TV show are constantly trying to tell me that Peggy is super important to Steve. I personally don't think she is, because I think in terms of the screen time that they've had together, it really doesn't make a lot of sense. But I just cannot see Steve then deciding to move in on Peggy's niece. I mean, it's so creepy and weird. And yes, I know it's a part of the comic book story, but even in the comic, it's super weird. Especially because in the comic, I think she's like her granddaughter. It's even weirder and creepier. And I don't think Steve needed a love interest really. And the kiss comes completely out of nowhere. And then Vision and Scarlet Witch, that whole thing was just really uncomfortable. It's super weird, especially considering that I know Elizabeth Olsen is a lot older than they're trying to make Wanda in the movie, but she's like she's like a teenage girl, or she's like in her very, very early 20s. And it is just so awkward to see this robot, this android with a very much an older person's voice, walk around the idea that he has sexual feelings for her, and then like stopping her from leaving. And it's just to me it got like really creepy, and I wasn't into it at all. I mean, I've never liked the Vision Scarlet Witch relationship in the comics, and I just thought this came off so weird, especially because they were dancing around the subject so much. Like, they never just went out and said how Vision feels. And you really don't get a sense Scarlet... The other thing is, like, it feels so one-sided, because I never got the idea that Wanda had any feelings for him. And I mean, God, it was so weird when he, like, just comes into her room without knocking, and it was just it came off to me as very, very awkward. And I think if they are trying to set these two up to be together, at any point in time in the future movies. I think this movie for me was just so many reasons why that wouldn't work. So I've been bitching about this movie the whole time. Let me tell you about the things I absolutely loved about this movie. I love Tony Stark's arc. The two major fight scenes in this movie, the airport fight scene, which was just absolutely everything I had imagined in a superhero versus superhero brawl. I absolutely love that scene. I think it's the greatest action scene ever made in a superhero film. The final fight scene with Tony versus Steve versus Bucky, I thought was incredibly emotional. It was incredibly big. It was just, it was great. I also want to say that I really like that they decided to go with a different take for the, he's my friend, and Tony says so was I, because one of the criticisms I had about that trailer is that Tony and Steve don't come off as friends in these movies. And the different line that, the way Robert Downey Jr. performed the line, again, the take that they went with, it felt less about heartbreaking and more just vengeful for Tony's side, which is Tony would view Steve as a friend, and I think you can see Tony's side of it, because of all the hoops that he's jumping to try and save Steve, and he just gets so aggravated that he did all this, and in his mind Steve completely betrayed him. So I love those fight scenes. Spider-Man is my favorite superhero of all time, and I absolutely loved him in this movie. Tom Holland, he was great as Peter Parker. He was great as Spider-Man. The costume was a little iffy. At times, it was very, very obvious that it was CGI, and other times it was a little less obvious that it was CGI. But it did kind of feel like they could have had, instead of just CGI in the suit, they could have had him in a physical suit. And then when they do cut to Tom Holland in the physical suit, like after he gets hit by Ant-Man and Tony comes over to him, it is very obvious that that suit that he's wearing now is not the suit that you saw in action. Like, the suit you saw in action was completely CGI, and then they had to make him put in a physical one for this. Ant-Man turned into Giant Man, something that I think a lot of us had theorized was going to happen, but it was just so cool to see. Just seeing all the other characters fight and adapt to what was going on around them, like Spider-Man jumping from the cars that Scarlet Witch was throwing at him. And I like that they made a point two times in that fight that once Tony says he was trying to go easy on him, and then when Scarlet Witch accuses Hawkeye of pulling his punches. It made it very, very obvious that there was a huge difference between the airport fight and the final fight, in that the airport fight, no one was really trying to injure each other, but they were trying to stop each other. And in the fight with Iron Man, Steve, and Bucky, it is very obvious that Tony is he's out for Bucky's blood. And he even gives Cap, the minute to just be like, after he kicks Cap's ass, like, stay down, because his beef is with Cap, but at the same time he's really there to he's there to kill Bucky, and I thought that was incredibly emotional, and I thought it was great, actually. Black Panther was pretty good in this. Chadwick Boseman's accent was a little weird, a little very obvious that that's not his real accent. But overall, I like the suit. It felt like he had more of a purpose in this film than Spider-Man. Spider-Man kind of came off to me like a Wonder Woman in BVS, where they're not in a lot of scenes and they're kind of just brought in for the final fight, but it's more of a little taste of what you're going to get when their movies come out next year. I think obviously with Spider-Man they had a little more to do, because they wanted to show what their version of Spider-Man was going to be, and show that they weren't going to do an origin story. They were going to skip right to him becoming Spider-Man. Whereas with Wonder Woman, I think it was a little more mystery and intrigue, so you do want to go and see what her story is in her movie that comes out next year. I kind of like the sort of friendly hate ship that Sam and Bucky had, and I really like Sam's line. Once Bucky's able to sort of remember things, and Steve's like, "Yeah, you couldn't remember that, you couldn't read that from museum," and Sam's just like, "Oh, we're just supposed to be best friends now because this guy tried to kill us a couple minutes ago," um, and I'm not exactly sure how Bucky is able to remember these things, considering that he was brainwashed for so long, and I kind of wish they did go a little more into what he's been doing to try and remember, besides just reading about Steve in a museum. So I feel like Bucky's, again, that's something I think we would have gotten more into if we had a proper Captain America 3 instead of Civil War. The action was great. I thought the humor for the most part worked. The only time I felt it was really awkward was when they're trying to do that very serious scene where Tony goes into the prison and they had to have Scott be like, Hank Pym always said never trust a Stark, and Tony's like, who are you? And which kind of felt like it was just taken from that moment in Guardians of the Galaxy. But I felt like, okay, we're supposed to be a little more serious now, and we're still intercutted with the humor. For the most part, it worked. I wish Scott and Hawkeye, for example, I kind of wish they would have gotten more into their motivations for helping Cap, considering that their families, especially Scott, because Scott's entire movie was about his whole motivation was his daughter, and it felt a little weird that he was just so willing to go back into possibly being a criminal. So it kind of almost felt like the writers didn't exactly know, what his true motivation was, and they're kind of just like, oh, I'm just a big fan of Cap. I'm gonna go ahead and do it. My daughter be damned, and even when Tony asked, Clint, why would you do this? Why would you break the law with your family and kids? Why didn't you think about them? Hawkeye doesn't even have a response to it, because it is kind of a big question. Like, why would you do this? I get freeing Wanda because he believes he owes a debt to her brother, but didn't really make a lot of sense here. But yeah, I mean, overall, I liked it. There's a really dramatic and emotional moment with Rhodey, which was spoiled in the trailers, but it's in here. And then I was kind of annoyed at the end when they have this idea that Vision friendly fired Rhodey. Rhodey gets injured. He's going to be paralyzed, and it's just like, oh my god. And then at the end of the movie, he Tony Stark makes some of these things, and he's walking again. And it's just like, could you guys just wait one movie? Could we just feel that there were ramifications? In terms of the stakes, I do think the stakes. I think you really feel the stakes at the end when these people are now criminals and on the run. At the same time, Cap and Black Widow were criminals and on the run during Winter Soldier. So it kind of feels a little bit like, I don't want to say been there, done that, but it does. And part of this movie also felt like it was doing what Age of Ultron didn't do in terms of juggling characters. And in terms of Zemo's plan, is exactly what Ultron's was supposed to be. He was supposed to tear the Avengers from the inside, and he didn't do it. So, I mean, I think one of the other issues with Civil War is it feels like it's trying to do what Age of Ultron didn't do, which is really interesting because of when this movie was filmed, when this movie would have had to be written, was not a lot of time between Age of Ultron and this. So I don't know. I really liked the movie. I didn't fall in love with it for all the issues that I brought up. I didn't think it was the greatest movie of all time. If you want to rank it, I would probably rank it around 4th. I still don't think it was better than the first Iron Man movie. I don't think it was as good as the Avengers, and I don't think it was nearly as good as Captain America: Winter Soldier. I think it creates an interesting dynamic for the next Avengers movie, in which Steve and his people are most likely scattered around the world as vigilantes, and Tony is with the Avengers, which at this point just consists of him, Rhodey, and Vision, and I'm sure Spider-Man will be involved. But yeah, I mean, I give it a B, maybe a B plus. I don't know. I think from the people that did Winter Soldier, I expected the story to be a little better, and I kind of thought the story was a bit all over the place, especially with Captain America not really having a character arc in his own movie. That really bothered me. Other than that, I got really nothing else to say about the movie. It's all about 35 minutes. But let me know what you guys thought. Did you think this movie, did this satisfy you? Did you think it was the greatest Marvel movie ever made? You know, did you think it was the worst movie made? I mean, I don't think anyone's going to say thought it was the worst, but were you disappointed? Did you think it was going to be bigger and better than it was? Anyway, guys, if you like this video, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys later.